Hi, everyone. Um, my apartment is quite echoey, so I want to apologize for that wah 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 wah. Okay, so today I'm going to give you another childbirth tip and trends for 2025. But if you're going to have your baby between now and then, totally applicable for you as well. I've been having a conversation with a person who's an editor of a consumer magazine, and we've had a conversation for an extended period of time about the birthing better skills and about the concept that families asked me to carry forward since the 1970s, particularly into the 1980s, and that I carried forward into New Zealand in the 90s, and I'm carrying forward still today. Not so successfully, which is very, very interesting. Because in the 1970s, when I gave birth in 1970, the concept that we're promoting was known by everybody. In the 50s to the mid 70s was the skills based childbirth concept. We were all taking Lamaze classes, and some were taking Bradley classes. Now, back then, we knew that those classes were targeted to low risk women to achieve a natural birth, pain free labor without medical care. However, they were also the very first worldwide global childbirth skills ever taught anywhere in the world. And we were that generation of the 50s and the 70s that we were hungry to do something differently than our parents and grandparents had done, which was to be left alone, often in a hospital, to discover birth ourselves, to not have skills, to often feel that we suffered in childbirth. And our husbands weren't there. They were in the bar or the waiting room, and then they handed out cigars. But once Lamaze started to be taught, multiple millions of us attended those classes, high risk or low risk. And even though we were high risk back then, 95% of us were laboring because the medical profession wasn't very sophisticated enough. But the real reason was anything and everything that could happen at birth was considered natural, normal, and physiological, and it was accepted. Tragedies were accepted. Problems were accepted. They became less accepted by the 1980s as the medical profession got more sophisticated and other societal changes occurred, like birth control. So we reduced the size of our family. So each child was more important to us. You have to remember that if you go into old cemeteries, there are a huge number of children under the age of 5 that died globally because there were no immunizations or antibiotics. And this is a hot topic right now. But that changed the world. The reason that we have this massive population explosion is not because everybody got cleaner environments and better foods. It's because we stopped children from dying. 20 to 30% of children died from communicable diseases. You can have an argument with me if you want about vaccines. I'm fine to have a conversation with you about it. But what we want to talk today about is what is this concept about self-learning skills mean? Now, this person I'm chatting with told me in an email that their belief is that self-learning means that somehow you pull these things out of the thin air. And the other was that they actually believe that it's a rare phenomena to self-learn. Now, I've spent 50 years telling people what families discovered and what we worked to discover all the birthing better skills, which was all about self-learning. Now, why did we know about self-learning? Because when we all went to Lamaze classes, we then went home and practiced. Now, you can say that the word practice is different from self-learning, and in some ways it is. There is practicing by rote. In other words, you're doing the exact same thing over and over again. And yet, the more you do that by rote, the better you get. So even when you're trying to replicate something the same way over and over again, you have to be self-learning because you perfect your technique or your capability. You can also practice by self-learning the skills, which mean these are the skills. I'm going to practice them. And I intentionally know that I am practicing them so that I own them. They're mine. I have a mastery of those skills. Now, I want to tell you a story within my family. I had kids quite a number of years apart. Between those two kids, Velcro came out, and I was sick and tired of tying shoelaces for young kids. A lot of you understand that, don't you? So for my youngest, I just got Velcro. By the time he was 9, he didn't know how to tie shoes. That's a problem. So I had to teach him how to tie a shoe, but then he had to practice. He had to self-learn. He didn't pull it out of thin air. And he might have. He might have just tied a knot at some point. But that's not the point. The point is self-learning is not about pulling things out of thin air. And instead of it being rare, it is the common way that humans learn. We self-learn when we are taught. Now, in 1970, when we were taught the skills, we went to a class. Yeah, there were some books, but very few books about childbirth skills. And the reality is now we're online. Our Birthing Better course is online learning management. When we first put out a quarter of our course material, it was a VHS, a cassette, and a book. People would buy it. They would learn from the video, from the book, from the cassette. They had to self-learn. And we want people to self-learn skills because if you don't self-learn them, you don't use them. Now, when should you use birth and birth coaching skills? When you're doing the activity of birthing your baby. That might include, I'm driving to the hospital to have a non-laboring cesarean that I don't want or I do want. That's your labor. Use your skills on the way to the hospital, while you're waiting, while you're being prepped, during the surgery. Why not? But more importantly, why? Is your baby's birth important to you? That's not a silly question. And your answer is going to be, of course it is. So if your baby's birth is that important to you, and it is to every family, why not use skills to do the activity of birthing your baby rather than just let this birth happen to you? This is what's happening because from the 70s until when I gave birth last in the 80s, the natural birth movement changed its goal. At first, it was very much into low-risk women learning those skills to achieve a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care, but they felt not enough women had achieved that. They did not see or acknowledge what obstetrical nurses and obstetricians saw in the United States in the hospitals when we were all using Lamaze and Bradley skills. They saw us cope better. And that has to do with dealing with the second global childbirth goal, which is how do you deal with the suffering of childbirth? And not only that, our husbands coached us. We felt closer to them. We developed confidence together as a family. And that got removed in the 1980s. Skills were actually actively dismissed. Cows and cats aren't taught to birth. That's true, but they're not human. We have a cortex. They don't. Humans thrive on being skilled. Everything we do, driving a car, is being skilled. Cows and cats don't drive cars. They don't cook their meals. In fact, they don't even teach their young what to take out of their mouth because you shouldn't have it in your mouth. They don't teach their kids how to tie their shoes. Humans are loaded with skills. We are skilled beings, and we feel more confident and more capable when we are skilled for the task at hand. So when the natural birth movement was saying, we don't need skills, cows and cats aren't taught, it's a dismissive attitude toward women. It was just like a shock because we knew that skills made us feel better. We coped better, we managed, we stayed on top of, we felt in control when we had some skills. Lamaze and Bradley weren't adaptable skills, they weren't adjustable, they often weren't sustainable, but at least they were a start. And so skills were totally dismissed, and no skills based method was developed, with the exception of the Birthing Better, in a 20-year period. Thankfully, you now live at a time where there are a lot of skills based methods, and we are saying to you, become skilled to do the activity of birthing your baby. So, what happened in the 80s? It was all about choices. Of course, women know what kind of birth they want, don't we? Sure, we do. We want to live, we want our kid to live, we don't want to suffer, we want to recover. But that wasn't what it was meant. We want a home birth with the lights such and such, and we want music, and we want this, and we want that, and we want people to do this and that. We don't want these medical assessments, monitoring procedures, which are now called interventions, and implied that they are unnecessary and imposed on us, rather than trying to safeguard us. We may not like them, and we may have plenty of issues about modern maternity care. However, we have to understand that the words normal, natural, and physiological, when it says pregnancy and childbirth are those things, that anything that might happen could happen. And when we accept the good and the bad, then we also have to ask, does it matter whether people are skilled if there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like? Yes, because it unfolds, right? That's what we learned. We might not be able to choose the birth we want because 99% of us say after the birth it was nothing like I imagined, but we have to do it. And the question remains today, as it did in the 70s, is the birth of your baby important to you? And there is no family, no woman who says, not too important, just a little thing. We all know how important the birth of our baby is. We know that childbirth is infrequent. Even when I'm working with families that have 20 children, it's still infrequent. And there aren't a lot of those families around anymore. So if you're having 5 kids, that's 5 times in your life. If you're having 2, twice in your life, is that baby's birth important to you? It's an activity you're going to do. 100% of you, if you're pregnant, you're going to do it. So the question is, why not do it with skills? It's going to happen to you anyway. So why not work through the activity of birthing your baby and have your partner or other, the person you love who's going to be in your baby's life, along perhaps with your doula, all learn skills together and work together. It's important. That's what we learned. That's what Birthing Better families learned. And we all knew we were self-learning. We weren't pulling it out of thin air all the time, although many of the skills were developed because we would say after the birth, could I have, if I had, what could I have done? And we would develop skills like that. And we developed lots of skills like that, and they're all in the Birthing Better courses. So what's an example of one of those skills? I hate birth. It's frequent. And what we learned was it's okay to hate it. But every time you breathe in and expand inside your pelvis. And breathe out and soften inside your pelvis. That'd be an example. Or what would happen if your partner reached out and touched you and you turned around and said, take your hand off me? Well, nobody wanted that. So we could shake our head. That was a form of communication. They'd take their hand off, but they wouldn't know when to put it back on. So we could take their hand and place it where we would like. Silly little examples of skills that make a huge difference. Good communication within ourselves and with others. Good breathing skills, good relaxation skills, not on the outside of our body, but inside where our baby's trying to move through us. What about back labor? Women who had their sacrum pressed for hours and their labor went on and on and on and on. It's because we discovered that when you press the sacrum, you're compressing the space the baby is trying to create by pushing out on the sacrum. So we learned that you could tuck your tail, that would open up the top of your sacrum, or you could push your tailbone back, that would open up the lower part of the pelvis on the inside, or your partner could put their hand on the diagonal of the sacrum and move it one way or the other. We could flex our sacrum. We could think about the bones we were sitting on and make a little bit more space between them for this big object that's coming through. Everything, every moment of birth is a moment where we can use one or more skills, whether we like the birth or not, whether there are things happening to us that we don't like or not. It doesn't matter. We are doing the activity of birthing our baby. We have to do the activity of birthing our baby. And what happens after the birth? Skilled families will always tell you we birthed better. They'll always tell you that. 100%. There is not one skilled family who goes, those skills didn't work. Every skilled family will say, I could have used the skills more deeply or a different time. And some just go, it was just amazing, moment to moment to moment. I could adjust the skills I was using. That was my experience when I gave birth last. So we want you to understand that self-learning is the common thing that all humans do all the time. We're always self-learning. And sometimes we are inventing skills on our own. Kids are too. For instance, you see a kid going from walking to standing. Now they have to, from crawling to standing, and then they're walking. They are figuring it out. They're practicing. They're mastering the skills of walking. Are they doing it innately? Doesn't matter. Birth is going to happen to you, but it's an activity you're doing. So use some skills. There's a link to our shopping cart. We have 20 courses now, people having a VBAC, people having a hospital birth or a home birth or a first time or a breech birth. But if you aren't certain, just buy the complete skills, because those are the skills that mothers and fathers developed in the 1970s and asked me to carry forward. And you can do one more thing. Tell your friends and loved ones, if you're pregnant, learn some skills and use some skills to birth your baby, no matter where you are birthing, no matter who is with you, no matter your choices, lack of choices, change your choices of your beliefs, no matter what happens to you or around you at the birth, use skills. And why? Because the memory of your baby's birth lasts your lifetime. Your lifetime. You remember it. And if birth just happens to you, it is an entirely different memory than if you worked through the birth of your baby. And how you come into parenting can be significantly changed as well. Because often we just get spit out and told, take care of the newborn. But families who work together through the birth of their baby feel infinitely more confident. So I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.